This is perfect for the Toronto Maple Leafs as a new report has revealed a very interesting Leafs target. And it's no secret that the Toronto Maple Leafs need to add another forward. And what this report said could be very surprising to a lot of you. So I'm going to break down the exact report and discuss whether or not this player fits the Toronto Maple Leafs and what it could mean going forward if they decide to sign him in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're part of the 70 or so percent who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself as we make daily Leafs content and we're on the road to 12,000 subscribers. And the season is getting started soon. We have a lot in store for you guys, so make sure to hit that button. But Darius, an interesting Leafs target has been revealed by a new report, and we've been discussing a few guys on PTOs, even just free agents in general. We discussed Cal Clutterbuck, we've discussed Matt Martin, and some other guys that we're going to continue to discuss over the coming weeks, because the Leafs, quite frankly, and we discussed it in a video recently, their forward group still needs a little bit of ironing and some fine tuning to that group if they want to really compete, or at least have a better chance to compete for a cup. And the guy we're talking about today is Kevin Labanc. And a report came out saying why Kevin Labanc would make sense on a PTO for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, again, it's a PTO. This guy's not going to completely change the whole outlook of the team. But what the point that Leafs are at right now, Darius, they need to start adding some guys that have defined roles, that add some depth to the forward group, and that can help them, whether it's in the playoff push or even just to make the playoffs in the regular season. We'll get into the report now in a second, but it basically says that the Leafs should be and are considering potentially adding Kevin Labanc on a PTO. What are your thoughts on this player?
Yeah, I think that the Leafs should be in on Kevin Labanc because he's a pretty good player, right? And I think no matter where he goes, we have another article we're going to get into a little bit later too, but no matter where he goes, it's going to be a PTO, not just the Leafs. Any team, it looks like it's going to be a PTO. And I think it's pretty low risk for the Leafs. If it doesn't work out in the first couple games or even training camp, you can let him go and try another option, right? So I think there's no risk in doing it. I think they should look at doing it, especially with this player because he's a right shot, right? I feel like they have a lot of left shots. Especially on forward. So he's a right shot. He's pretty tenacious. I think he's a victim again of playing on a really bad team. And that's why his stat line looks the way it does. We talked about it last year with Simone Benoit. He was, statistically and, through all the charts, literally the worst player you could possibly get in the NHL. And he's turned out pretty good. So I think, again, he's a victim of playing on a bad team. And I think he could look pretty good on the Leafs. It might be a good fit. And like you said, the Leafs, we know what they are. We know the core four. We know most of the pieces, including Morgan Riley, that are going to be on the team. Right, the big players, but they got to start figuring out what the rest of the lineup looks like, and it has to have an identity. We talked about it with Clutterbuck, how he would add to an identity, and I thought the fourth line in the playoffs last year finally had an identity. They need to start creeping more and more towards that, and I feel like a player like this could help in that way. I could see a player like this on the third line on the Leafs next year. So I do like the player. I think it'd be an interesting fit, and some reports are agreeing with that.
You can see this here in this article. The Leafs obviously don't have much in the way of maneuverability, but they can still look at some of the promising options with their $1.2 million left. And you can see this here again. A PTO, if you're unfamiliar, it's a professional tryout, which allows the team to take the opportunity to take a closer look at players like we've been discussing on the channel. And Kevin Labanc has some of the biggest upside, and you mentioned it. Again, if you're unfamiliar with Labanc, because he does play for the Sharks, who haven't really been exciting. They're a bit exciting now, though, after a few of the trades they make, but he's been a solid depth piece for the team for most of his career, with a particularly impressive showing, obviously, 4 or 5 years ago when he had 56 points. But he's not a guy where he's been a forward where throughout his whole career he hasn't put up 30 points, 40 points, like a lot of the guys we're discussing on PTOs. Obviously, he is only 28 years old, but he had a bit of a rough season. I was only 9 points in 46 games, but just when he was younger, 24, 25 in that 2018-19 season, maybe even 23, he put up 56 points, which is very, very interesting. So this guy has the ceiling to be at least a serviceable player. It's not like he's getting old, like a guy like Cal Clutterbuck, like we've discussed, to where, hey, he's not going to get any better. This guy has the chance, like even Benoit to a degree, obviously different positions, but Benoit was on a very bad team. He still played 72 games. He put up not 90 points, wasn't great defensively, and one of the worst defensive teams in the league. Labanc, maybe they could have a similar situation here where he's put around players that actually can set him up better, have obviously playing alongside a lot of different good players in the Leafs, much better in the Sharks. Maybe it can set him up to break out and go back to, even if it's 20 or 30 points on a PTO. It's not very often you get to sign guys on PTOs that have had decent seasons at the NHL level, sustained and still playing.
Yeah, and I mean, he is 28, so he's getting older. I don't think he's going to necessarily get better, but I don't think, he's being used to the best of his abilities on the team he's on right now. Like you mentioned, 56 points a couple seasons ago. Obviously, he was younger, but I think that was the last time the Sharks were, relevant, right? Or
See it right
even
there.
really even good at all. That was the last time they were good. So I think if he got a shot on a better team, he doesn't have much to work with in San Jose at all, right? And I don't, he's not a difference maker. He's not a game breaker type player or anything like that, but I think he can be a really good depth and role player. So if you were to put him on a team like the Leafs, where the scoring's taken care of, he can kind of chip in here and there. And again, like I said, I like his play. I feel like he's tenacious. The last time that the Sharks were in the playoffs, they had some success. I like the way he played personally, at least. I know some people won't like that anyway, but I think it could be a good fit for the Leafs moving forward, or even just a 1-year deal, right? Something super low risk, and again, a PTO. I think they should look at it because again, low risk, and you don't have to follow through for the entire season if it doesn't work out. So I think he's worth a look for sure.
Yeah, and you can see this here. You mentioned it. Labanc's best production last came when the Sharks went all the way to the conference finals, which is the last time they were competitive. So in a competitive structure team, Kevin Labanc was good. Now, obviously, the team fell off a little bit, and obviously his production. But we've seen this across the NHL to the point where maybe the Leafs, I mean, they've done this before. I mentioned it, Benoit, and just around the NHL. I am very interested in this guy. Now, again, he's not going to make the Leafs significantly better. I don't think he turns them from fringe cup contenders to, wow, this team is going to go super far. But when you're talking about PTOs, we know Brad Treliving came out and said, hey, we're not done making moves. Now, whether that's in the form of a PTO, whether it's in the form of a signing like Cal Clutterbuck, or, of course, we're still looking at the Nick Robertson trade, a signing like this is going to be very crucial in order for the Leafs to sustain what they are doing. And you can see the league has seen Labanc's offensive upside, but he isn't at the tail end of his career. A PTO might be the best thing for him to continue his career. And this was after GM Mike Grier confirmed that Labanc's time as the member of the Sharks is over, because they're obviously changing fully into a youth movement over there. So makes a ton of sense to me, and it's very interesting, especially because it seems like other teams around the league aren't necessarily going all in for them. And that makes a lot of sense, because I don't know how many teams around the league are in a similar direct spot to the Leafs. I think it fits the Leafs better than most teams from both a team constructive perspective and just from the front office perspective as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of teams like you mentioned that maybe could be interested in him, and maybe they have cap space, but those are most likely teams that have to sign RFA still. So, they don't have as much cap space as we think. So I think a lot of teams are kind of in the same boat where they're tight up against the cap and they might have to sign a guy like this or other people to PTOs. And I don't want to, directly link or compare Kevin Labanc to Connor Brown, but for some reason I am, making that comparable because I can see him being that type, like kind of on the third line. You kind of forget about him, and maybe he can score a couple goals here and there because he's, so sheltered and stuff like that. So I don't want to compare him 100%, but I could see that type of role for him on the Leafs where, he's a third line player and he's going to come in the playoffs, and, Matthews will take the big matchups, and Tavares will take the big matchups as well still. And, he might have some space out there on the third line to do his thing, because I don't think that skill goes away, right? I still think he can score goals at the NHL level. It's just the team he was playing on. There's nobody to, to pass him the puck. There's nobody to pass the puck to. So, he's had a tough go the last couple of years, but I think there is something still to his game that could, help the Leafs out in their quest for a Stanley Cup this year. Because honestly, that is the ultimate goal of this season, right?
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of different articles. There's obviously a different one linking them. And again, even if he's not producing offensively, he's still a very solid defensive forward and puts the work ethic out there, throws his body around. So let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Do you want to see Kevin Labanc as a Toronto Maple Leaf? I think this one we might look back on in a few weeks and say, hey, we called it, but we'll have to see, and let us know in the comments what your thoughts are.